My name is Michele Hearn, and I'm a graduate student at Texas A&M University Commerce. And I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Sarah Young, who is the author of Working Through Surveillance and Technical Communications. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time to do this interview with me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited too, a little nervous, but this is hopefully, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat with you.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to start off with the first question. Your book, Working Through Surveillance and Technical Communication, explains that protection against surveillance goes beyond addressing privacy harms. Can you tell me what this means?
I think what I was getting at there is that, when I teach kind of a lot of like 101 kind of courses, and it's always like, well, why does private or surveillance matter? What does it matter? And it's like, well, you can start thinking of like, well, it takes away privacy, or someone's watching, or, there's too much concentration on one thing. Anyway, that we can think of privacy harms, but I think another thing to think about is that. There's some good to surveillance, so we can't always think in harms. If we're always thinking in harms, we're kind of maybe alienating one group of people that or to dialogue with, that might say, well, privacy or surveillance is good. So that's one reason. But I think the bigger reason is that we always can't throw the power or the lack of power onto the person that's under surveillance. We also need to think about the people that are doing the surveillance and are doing the watching. And a lot of times, and I think that the book was trying to argue, is that it's a lot of workplace surveillance, and it's a lot of things that we're tasked to do during the day in a working activity. So I think that the idea was that we don't just have to think in terms of privacy. We also have to think in terms of as a harm, or how do we as people carry out these actions of surveillance in a normal day-to-day basis, I guess. That we can protect kind of certain, I guess, rights or privacies through the less surveillance.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation. That is really helpful to understand where you're coming from about that, and it makes a lot of sense, especially in the workplace. And having your privacy, and also going from the perspective of the person being surveyed and the people who are doing the surveillance, and having that perspective in mind whenever you were writing your book. Okay, question number 2. How does your unique background as someone who was previously retained by the U.S. Federal Investigation Services shape your perspective on the topic of privacy and surveillance? So how does your previous work experience guide your perspective?
Yeah, I think in two ways. First of all, like that kind of going back to that first question, is that, there's somebody that's going to be doing the surveillance. And that's a lot of times like a workplace activity that's tasked to do that. So I think it's always embedded in me, I guess, to think about like, who is doing the surveillance? Why are they doing it? What handbook is like covering this, these actions? Like, what are people allowed to do versus what are the limitations of surveillance? So I think that it's helped me think in terms of, like the proceduralized use of surveillance, and how people carry that activity out. And then also, as someone that was doing the investigations, you are also kind of you're scrutinized as well to make sure, you're doing the right thing. So like it's a continual evaluation of your own character. So I think like that, the idea that you're always being watched, or always, kind of, you have to, there's like a pressure to conform and to the what you're supposed to be doing. So I think my workplace background has not only helped me see doing it, but also on the receiving end as well. And it really impacts me to think about what it feels like to be watched, and kind of helps me craft the questions that I think of.
That's a really good point that you made about having guidance for surveillance. right? It can't just be a free for all. Like people have to have guidance for surveillance, and then it does impact you whenever you're doing surveillance and making sure that you're doing it right. And I think that's very powerful for people to understand that, there are people behind it and it does impact people, and that there are guidelines for surveillance and there should be guidelines for surveillance. Thank you for that. Okay, so number 3, how do we merge ethics and the practices of surveillance? And how do we communicate the importance of this to the surveillance community and also to educators like myself? I'm a middle school educator. And so how do we communicate the ethics of this?
Kind of, I guess, like privacy, like the idea of privacy surveillance is always like contextual. So I think that if we just say, there's no blanket statement as to whether surveillance is always going to be ethical or, so I guess, first of all, we have to agree on a definition of ethics, and then we have to think about like, how does each situation of surveillance have to do with ethics. If we're thinking about, surveillance, sometimes I think, is there an ethical surveillance? Is there even like a way that we could reach that situation? So I think merging it is always thinking in terms of resting it like an empirical example, and thinking about like what are the exact situations. Think in the book I had talked about, think about who's doing the surveillance, who's being surveilled, why are they being surveilled, kind of like a whole scenario of surveillance that you can kind of run through, and figure out who is doing what and what is it being done for. So I think merging, from the outside looking in, we can think about like evaluating a situation. For an internal person, I guess they can also do the same thing, and thinking about, if I'm a boss and I'm just doing a performance evaluation, it seems like a rudimentary thing, but you're also, kind of working on surveillance and what is ethical, what is just in this situation, I guess you could say. And then communicating the importance of those tests to the community and to educators. I think, just having people think about in terms of situation, because I think I said it, the first thing, there's always going to be, there is some good in surveillance, it does keep, the law and order sometimes, like sometimes we need somebody to be watching over us for care, because there is also surveillance of care. So we have to, the importance of, I guess, thinking about ethics is thinking situationally, and what is appropriate for a certain situation, and what does it do to the population that is being surveilled, or the groups that are being surveilled, and how much power do they have in a situation or not? Do they even know that they're being surveilled? So kind of a lot of different questions to evaluate a certain scenario. And I think it's important to have the surveillance community think about this, because I think when you're involved in, I guess, maybe this like real firm idea of like a surveillance person that's, working under surveillance, intel or something like that. Again, you're tasked to do a job based off of, job requirements, the expectations of a position, the handbook guidance, your limitations and what you have to do. So you're not necessarily taught, maybe some people are, but in some situations, you're not talk about like the ethics of this situation. You're told to kind of like follow the procedures. And I think historically, it gets people into trouble to say, I was only doing my job, kind of thing. And then educators as well, to like help people kind of think in terms of questioning the tests that they're given and the effect on people of what they're doing. Because I think surveillance is exceptionally important for people, because knowing that you're being watched does change your behavior and affects the way you think and affects the way you feel, and it's very affective, and so it does change people and the way they act and experience life. So I think it's important to kind of encourage a look at the idea of surveillance, so that people they're just more aware of a sensitized concept, you know, so that they can start viewing the world kind of through that lens a little bit.
I definitely think what you said resonated with me is that educating people about surveillance and making people aware, because I think that maybe the general public has a certain idea of surveillance. And then what you're explaining now is that there's all kinds of different types of surveillance that can happen. And I think that's a great, your answer was amazing, especially for me as an educator, just making people aware, making the public aware. And then also, you know, having the surveillance people think about ethics and making sure that they're doing it as ethically as possible within those guidelines and knowing the difference. So that was great. Is it possible? Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just on that. Yeah. So then in that case too, also to rethink what surveillance is, and not just think of it in a Hollywood terms of, you know, yeah, FBI agents in a van, but, you know, just like this act of watching someone else, for some particular purpose, really kind of brings it down to more like social, activity rather than like a, you know, a formal, yeah, government watching person. So.
Yes.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay. Is it possible to have transparency and surveillance in the same space?
Um, you know, I think yes, in certain ways. I'm not sure exactly how you're thinking of that term, so maybe you can re-ask me when after I answer, but I think the only way to have um transparency would be to have some type of surveillance, because if you're a government agency, and you say you're going to be transparent, someone else is going to have to be watching you to make sure you're doing the right thing. So I guess in those respects, yeah, like someone has to be watching to make sure something is transparent. And yeah, so I think there's a key connection between transparency and as well as privacy. And I don't know, I always think that there was an article by, I believe, Sammy Cole, that talked about how, you know, privacy is and surveillance also are not, you know, opposites. You don't, they're also allies as well. You need to have some type of privacy in order to conduct surveillance. So I think there's kind of a, you know, a triangular connection between like the ability to have transparency, but also privacy and surveillance. They all kind of relate to each other, and you kind of need them all in a certain way, to have, I guess, they all end up in a relationship together.
Yes, that makes sense the way that you explain that. Definitely that they're kind of intertwined. You kind of need them both in order to be successful.
Yeah.
Okay, in your opinion, what is the most important thing to consider when teaching about surveillance in technical communications course? And what do the students need to know to be successful?
I think that going back to the definition of surveillance as being something other than just, yeah, more formalized, the capital SW surveillance worker kind of thing. That's not like the only surveillance that's going on. I think it's more fundamentally about, you know, watching other people for some type of, you know, monitoring or observation, and most likely attached to a power dynamic as well. So if we just rethink the idea of surveillance and start off with a definition that's like pretty, you know, at a basic level, what is surveillance? And then also, I think it's always important to kind of touch on the ideas of Foucault and panopticism, because every time you talk to someone about surveillance, you know, those are the topics that are brought up. But as surveillance studies as a field has, you know, kind of not moved on past them, that, you know, that's just an area, but we always, you know, there's a lot of other concepts besides like panopticism, and a lot of times we get caught up in just saying, oh, you know, it's the panopticon, they're, you know, we're all watching each other and we don't know when kind of idea. But, you know, I think, yeah, when you're teaching students, it's important to understand, yeah, not just the definition, but how, like, maybe the history of the term and how it's moved on or moved. And also, specifically in technical communication courses, I find that most technologies nowadays are kind of have some type of surveillance function. So I think any like technical communicator or a person dealing with technology is in some forms either a subject of surveillance or an agent of surveillance, a target of surveillance, whatever you might say. You're involved in some type of a circle, whether you know it or not, or you're a targeted of surveillance. And I think also, yeah, like having that realization or kind of picking the points out of your own life where you are conducting surveillance, I think is important. And knowing, and to be successful, I think students need to also have that ethical component or the justice component to think about, like, what am I doing? Why is this important? You know, maybe, yeah, like, how is this affecting me or the other people that I'm around and what I'm doing? And you know, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop a practice because, you know, yeah, say you're a boss and you have to do a performance evaluation, you know, but it's probably you're going to have to do it if you're a manager, or you're going to lose your job at a certain point, and you're going to have to be subjected to it, or you know, you won't still be employed. But there's also, like, I think a balance you can work on when you're working with people. So I think fundamentally surveillance also and technology particularly too, it always comes down to like working with individual people and thinking about people involved in the scenarios that we're working with. And so a successful student would think about understanding what surveillance is, what privacy is, why it's problematic, what they can do about it, and why, I guess, yeah, like what I don't know. I think that's it. Yeah, why it's problematic and what they can do about it. I think, or probably what I'd say.
And definitely starting with the base of defining it is
Mhm.
so important, because you can't work with it if you can't define it. And so
Yeah.
that definitely makes sense for students, like starting off there, like, let's define it and then we can build on that.
Mhm.
Okay. Is it important to think about surveillance and the technical communications in relationship to social justice issues in marginalized communities? Beyond increasing monitoring, how can we think about how the surveillance leads to discrimination today, including things like reduced access to resources or reading and limitations of free expression?
Oh, I think, yeah, I think social justice and surveillance are like particularly entwined, and that you can't have, I think, like surveillance to me is just a lens you use in order to look at it and see if a situation is just, or how just is the situation. I don't know if it's a ranking or rating or something like that, but I think that surveillance is I sometimes there's lateral surveillance where, you know, peers watch each other, but I still think, and whatever situation of surveillance is, there's always a power dynamic.
Mhm.
So there's the person that has more power is often doing the watching and has control of the consequences of that watching. So even if you have like there's also like the surveillance where you can kind of watch those in power. But I also feel like, you know, ultimately, usually the people in power are the ones that retain the power, even if, you know, sometimes the balance is shifted. So anyway, I think that, yeah, it's important to me, like, you can't have surveillance without that, like that justice component, because I think it's a way to see how just a community is being treated, or how things are functioning. How can we think? I think we specifically, yeah, like the idea of categorical suspicion, or like, you know, this panoptic sort, or this idea that, you know, people are no longer, or the Deleuzian idea of a individual is that, you know, we're no longer individuals, where we're like singled out for who we are as people, but we're individuals where we're like lumped into group of other people to see how like we are of other people. So I think that's more of the situation that we're in now, and it would lead to more discrimination and problematic positions, because people and their data are sorted into like how they are like other people, even if they're not even like that, you know, depending on like you know, the age, or the zip code you live in, or, you know, the social, race, class, gender kind of things, you know, like we're sorted into these things to see how like we are of other people, yeah, even if we're not like that. So I think it's, I think that's one of the, problematic things about current contemporary surveillance practices is that, you're no longer, who you are, so to speak. You're more about your data and how you relate to other people, which is kind of in some ways takes away some of your identity, and or at least it gives someone else power to control your identity, and also takes away your power to control your own. So I think, again, back at the beginning, it's like it's all about power, and someone that's doing the surveillance is most likely the person that has the power to rank you, use that information for you, or do whatever they want with the information, even if it's hold on to your data as long as they feel like it. So.
Yes, that really resonated with me about people being grouped. Like you're put into a group, even though that may not be your individuality, right? So you're classified in this way, and that doesn't make you an individual. It makes you part of a group. And sometimes you're right, you do lose your individuality because you don't fit into that group. And so that definitely makes sense. And the power dynamic, right? The people in power are usually doing the surveillance, really resonates with me also. Okay, so when do we need to start teaching the importance of technical communications and surveillance to kids in public school? When do you think that, me as a public school educator, should we start talking to students about this?
Yeah, I have worked with some presentations in elementary school kids, and I'd love to say, let's start it there, or start it, although, you know what, the kids that I do come in contact with, I'm always telling them about privacy and always talking about media literacy and things like that. So I think it's always important to, I think, any kid that can understand how to use a computer needs to start learning how to algorithms. Why on, if they're watching YouTube, does, what's a kid's thing? I don't know, Blippy or something like that.
Yes.
Why do these videos keep popping up in relation to each other? You can start teaching them what an algorithm does and why it likes content and things like that, and how, I know that I have a kid, and he searched something, or he got questionable search results, and I'm like, why is this? But like the first name of somebody matched somebody else, and so like the algorithms had pulled up stuff that like a small child should never have seen before. So it was I guess a teachable moment to kind of explain to him why like this content is up and why it's inappropriate, that kind of thing. But I think, as middle school, especially, as you say, like, I think not only are students understanding how to use computers, but they've also like are starting to manipulate them, not necessarily manipulative, but like they're using them as well. So I think early on, as soon as kids can use a computer, I would start teaching them about surveillance and how people are, their searches are available to other people, their contents or comments are available to other people, especially as once you start going into chat rooms and things like that, or putting comments on things that people need to know, like what surveillance is and why it's important. And I know that some people think that, the private, and also, tell them about privacy issues. I think, I guess, I should probably think of a more focused way to say this, but there's so many issues that you can teach a kid about that you don't realize that you've kind of internalized and know about until you start seeing a young person try to interact with a social media or some type of other technological device, and you think, wow, there's so many literacies that I've picked up along the way that kids just don't know. And surveillance in those respects can be good. They can know that, that they probably shouldn't post inappropriate comments, because someone will be watching, but also it could be bad when, like there could be bad people looking at their comments, or there could be, the corporate people keeping track of their search terms and whatnot as well. So I think, yeah, like I think it's a useful way, and I think couching it and surveillance is also, I would say, even kind of fun, because the kids do get this Hollywood idea of like what surveillance is, and
Yeah.
thinking of themselves as their own, that, you know, they are an agent of surveillance as well. Sometimes I think it's at least it's an interesting concept, I think, sometimes.
Definitely, and the way that you
Yeah.
put that into perspective, it is easy for kids to understand and relatable when you talk about the algorithm and what comes up. I think that's a great starting point, and I do agree. I think the younger, the better, especially to keep students and safe from things that are on the internet.
Mhm.
Okay, how do you see the role of technical communicators in reducing surveillance and its impact, particularly in oppressive practices?
I think that, again, I think that most technical communicators in some form are also practicing a form of surveillance, because I think a lot of technical communicators are working with technology in some type of way. I mean, you, yeah, I think that, or anybody that's working with technology, but technical communicators, I think, are particularly poised to do that, because we're a lot of times, trying to explain more technical issues, or things that have to do with technology. Um, and so just the idea of if there's an awareness of what surveillance is, and you use that as a sensitizing concept when you're working with watching others, or also like creating content for people to watch. I also think, yeah, like, if we're working on content creation, and like, what does it mean, or when to have someone else watching, if you're setting up to like a website for a business, and you like put somebody's room number that they work in, or something, like, like, so someone could physically show up and know where this person is. I think, yeah, like being aware of like the choices you make, and how other people are watching and watching you. I think so. I guess as I talk about this, I think a lot about surveillance, and this idea of watching someone else, and someone else watching you, and how that impacts you. So I think that technical communicators could reduce some of that, or at least think of, or pose a question to someone else, maybe in a higher power, or where they're working with or working through, to say, do we need this information visible? Do we need to be conducting this? Do we need to be keeping track of this? How good are we keeping data? I think in, 30 years, I don't know how the timeline, but I'm also doing a lot of research right now in quantum networks and quantum communications. And if we can, if quantum computing takes off, any of our stored data is going to be subject to some privacy risks with quantum networks. So I think, yeah, like right now in the present, do we need to store all this information? Not only do we have immediate risks to, data breaches, but, we also have future potential risks to that as well. So I guess I see, and particularly oppressive practices. I also think in terms of, the social justice, the work that's being done in technical communication, the idea of a coalition. So not only does a technical communicator have to, protest individually, but they can also, hopefully have other people in order to, kind of work with and work through to kind of make a larger impact by getting together and saying that, this practice is harmful, or do we need to be doing this? So I think a lot about the value of technical communication is also, yeah, this idea that I think the coalitional ideas of
I definitely
reacting.
love that. And I think the part about asking a question, is this needed? What is the purpose? Are all great ways to reduce the surveillance. If you're just asking those questions before you start surveilling, or, before a company starts surveilling, it's like, what is the purpose and do we need this? Will definitely help in reduction. How are the definitions of technical communication and surveillance workers evolving? And why is this significant for the future of technical communication and scholars and practitioners?
How are they evolving? I think that I guess for me, you know, I think, yeah, the idea of like maybe this lowercase technical communication idea that, that somebody that's not necessarily a formalized technical communicator is doing some type of communicating technical information. Kind of like there's as more and more people become users of technology or more, I guess that, yeah, maybe users of technology or people, engaging in YouTube or watching YouTube or things like that. We have more places for technical communication and more examples of where technical communication can happen. And also at the same time, yeah, that I almost feel like technology and surveillance are kind of synonymous. It's leaving a trail, it's, recording something, it's, mediating something. A lot of times, yeah, technology and it is especially, yeah, our mediated technologies are leaving trails of things. So I guess, yeah, they're evolving because there's more places where I think we could consider technical communication, and also that therefore we are also seeing more places where surveillance is happening. And I think that's significant for the future for scholars and practitioners, because I think that, yeah, if we kind of accept the definition of a larger definition of who this is, we have the potential to reach a greater number of people, and also, I guess reach and teach a greater number of people about surveillance, and why it's problematic, and what someone's role is in that scenario. Again, yeah, like if we have surveillance, we don't just have to have these. In order to stop surveillance, we don't just need to have more privacy, we also need to stop the people that are doing it or limit it as well. So
Definitely. And I think your explanation also just taught me now that I think my thought would be that, digital surveillance and technical communications is something so formal, but there's also an informal piece to it. And I think that's very helpful to realize, is that it's not just inside of a box. There's all kinds of informal ways of doing technical communication, surveillance, and all of those things. So that's really helpful and definitely opened up my thinking. Um, Last question. What future direction or areas of exploration do you think have been most promising in the field of technical communication and surveillance studies?
Well, I think, yeah, I might be biased on this because I'm working on quantum work right now, but I think artificial intelligence and quantum work are probably there's more technical ways of or I guess popular of like how we're writing, how we're working. I think we're going to just be using generative AI a lot more to kind of help us think through things, organize things. So I think that is going to be important. And then, in the next, 15 years, quantum will kind of come along after that, maybe overlap that and kind of take it to a new level. So I think, yeah, especially technical communication, I think could really think about how maybe even understanding or like breaking down what is generative AI and how's it working. It could do some of the technical work that like helps others see like how this is happening and how it works. To not just think about, like the end product of what it's giving you, but also like how it's working as well. And also, for surveillance studies, because I also see that there's a connection in the classroom, because, if people are on the offensive that, oh, my students have this chat GP, so they're going to use it, so now I'm going to look at them under harsher scrutiny. I think that there's like a connection between potentially more distrust in the classroom through that work. But yeah, so beyond AI, I think we also, the overall idea of digitalization, or this like hunger for information, and that the meaning, the idea that we can make meaning out of data is always going to be undercurrent in I guess in the job market. So I think students will have to think about what it means to be in a world that is data hungry, and it's just going to be hungrier for that as we get quantum computers and we can do more technological computations of things. I think it'll just be more alluring to gather more and more data, which I think will lead to more surveillance, and also require more of us to work, or should require more of us to know how our data is used and think about it. So I think technical communication has a good space to help think more about the technical things that are going on behind maybe the things that are emerging, the technologies. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add in? Anything that you want to share about anything future that you're working on? Any upcoming projects?
No, I just, yeah, I think I'm excited about, generative AI and quantum technology, I guess emerging technologies in general, just because I think there's such a high connection to, technology and surveillance and privacy, and I'm teaching a course right now where, you know, we're looking at privacy, ethics and social impacts, and it was really surprised because I thought that more of the students would be really interested in the surveillance side, but a lot of them were interested in the privacy side. And I think that there's a lot of jobs, and like, you know, especially since I'm working in Europe right now, you know, there's a lot of privacy officers and things. So I think that we're going to have, you know, a lot of emerging technologies and a lot of spaces for especially like people that are concerned about privacy. So I see we're in some ways headed in good directions, although we always have to be critical of the surveillance that's happening as well, because I think as much as we're going in a good direction, you know, one privacy officer isn't gonna, you know, solve a problem. But you know, at least there are people thinking about these things. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I have learned so much more about privacy and definitely shifted the way that I think about it. And I really appreciate you coming on here and being willing to be interviewed today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So thank you.